I'm Andrea Donsky, founder of Morphus, powered by Naturally Savvy. And today we're going to be talking about brain health. When we get into perimenopause and menopause, the subject of memory and cognition comes up a lot. So I'm very excited to have with me today Dr. Bryce Wylde. I am so excited, and I'm going to read your bio really quickly. Bryce Wylde is a leading health expert and clinician specializing in integrative and functional medicine, blending the latest in science and technology with traditional and ancient remedies. Welcome to Morphus.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Great idea, great concept. Love it. Love Naturally Savvy. I love the work that you do, and it's my pleasure. It's my honor to be on the show.
Thank you, Bryce. All right, let's jump into it. Let's talk about brain health. I want to understand as we get older. So we're talking to women who are in their 40s and onwards. And as we get older, our estrogen levels decrease. How does that play a role and affect our brain health?
It's a huge role. In fact, actually, it is all in your head. We're going to get to that. Literally and figuratively speaking, menopause is a new concept that a lot of us are just becoming familiar with in the world of functional medicine, but it really does in so many ways start in your head. And it has a lot to do with the molecule serotonin, a feel-good molecule that a lot of us have come to be aware of as it pertains to prescription medication and antidepressants, which, by the way, as a lot of your listeners and viewers will know, pertains in so many ways to the perimenopause and menopausal experience. So for so long, we have thought estrogen is pretty much exclusive to the periphery, the ovaries, the fertility aspect of estrogen, right? That powerful hormone that ultimately divides cells and grows cells and is responsible for ovulation and a whole host of other biological happenings as it pertains to your cycle. But so much of it is underappreciated as it relates to how it functions in the brain. For some time now, I've been focused on brain health. I mean, a lot of us know what we're doing to lower perhaps our cholesterol. Totally different story. It's an old concept to be worried about cholesterol, but I mentioned it because most of us are simply familiar with our numbers. We know what our blood pressure is. We know what our weight approximately is on the scale. But if I were to ask your viewers if they knew what their hippocampal volume was or how their cerebral cortex was functioning that day, I bet you not one of them would know.
I don't even know that. So explain what that even is.
Well, so hippocampal volume is something you could get done on an MRI. You can go under a non-invasive MRI and have the volume of the memory center of your brain, very relevant to menopause, by the way, as you earlier mentioned. Memory is a big issue for perimenopause and menopausal symptom sufferers. So, but back to the idea that we don't know enough about our brain and how it's functioning, even though you can do these things to get baseline, memory function tests. We don't do them. And yet the brain is the most important organ in our body. It baffles me. I went ahead and I wrote a whole book about this. Where we desire, by the way, Andrea, as you know, to live longer. I mean, that's well established. We also desire to live longer well. We call this lifespan. But I went ahead and I sort of one-upped on that. And I wrote a book called Brain Spanners. And this is all about living your best life as long as possible, optimal cognitive function. So optimal cognitive faculties. Excellent memory, astute concentration, focused attention, alertness, good sleep. You name it, you're going to have it lifelong. And this pertains, let's go full circle back to perimenopause and menopause. And we know this is a rite of passage. Menopause is not a disease. It's simply your hormones re-equilibrating, which has something to do with genetics as well, by the way, but park that thought for a moment. And let's go back to this idea of so much of this starting in the brain. This neurochemistry. Serotonin, I've already alluded to, but there's others. Noradrenaline and adrenaline. This is the fight or flight relationship, these chemicals that are responsible for stress. And this all, by the way, ties into your adrenal glands. I'm going to throw a big term at you, okay? So we're going to come back to this over and over. PNEI, psychoneuroendocrine immunology. PNEI, that's it, a big acronym, big term, it's a hyphenated term that stands for the psychology that interacts with the neurology, that's your nervous system and brain, that interacts with your endocrine system, which is your hormones, which all ties into your immune system, right? Okay, so serotonin, our good friend serotonin. Here's what happens. Let's actually maybe talk about the biophysiology, just to refresh everyone's memory as it relates to perimenopause and menopause. There's actually 5 stages if you want to get technical, but let's keep it to 3.
Okay.
Perimenopause. This happens roughly around 45 years old, and actually even as early as 37 for some women. Let's not get too technical about ages, but it happens as a rite of passage as your hormones tend to, wean down in preparation for ultimately your ovaries shutting down altogether. That happens for some as early as 48, 50, sometimes, in the early 50s. That's menopause. That's no cycle for 12 months. And then, of course, postmenopause. So after 12 months with no period, amenorrhea, you're not having a menstrual cycle. So in the medical books, you are in postmenopause. Okay, so what's happening? Your ovaries aren't producing the amount of estrogen and progesterone they once did. Your brain is not signaling downstream through what's called follicular signaling hormone, or FSH. It's not telling the ovaries make estrogen. So if follicular stimulation hormone is tapering down, your ovaries are on their way down to producing the amount of estrogen. That down regulation actually affects the brain in a way where metabolism down regulates. That means your literally centers in your brain that are influenced by estrogen and insulin production are no longer as astute. And by the way, so in a nutshell, I want folks to think of it like this. Estrogen, petering down through peri and menopause doesn't happen in this sort of nice downward trend. It goes like this, right? So up and down, up and down, up and down, as opposed to when we're in our adolescence and there's this serious hockey curve uptick of testosterone if you're a guy, or estrogen if you're a girl. It's just consistently up and up and up and up. And why that's relevant is because this up and down, but nonetheless downward trend of estrogen production, signaling from the brain to the ovaries, produce less, but then next month you have your period, and then for 2 months you don't, and then all of a sudden you do again. It's very confusing to your system at large, but not just the periphery, in the brain, because estrogen receptors exist throughout your entire body. Have receptors that estrogen can dock into. And in the brain, when they're not docking in the numbers that they once did, I'm going to reiterate, metabolism gets thrown off. One reason why there's weight gain. Vasodilation, that is the ability of the brain to control the peripheral system as it relates to temperature, is thrown off. This is the hot flush or the hot flash. These thermal centers in the brain that regulate temperature, like the thermostat, on your wall for the heat or coolness in your home, gets thrown off. Insulin dysregulation starts in the brain. Serotonin, as I mentioned, the output, the manufacturing of serotonin, the feel-good hormone, that's also relevant to sleep-wake cycles, decreases. This is also related to, of course, mood. So when you think about every symptom that you experience in menopause, mood dysregulation, lack or imbalances in sleep, hot flashes, metabolism issues. I mean, those are just some of them, but the big ones women experience, it all literally and figuratively starts in the head, in the brain.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And one of the things I noticed, because I'm in menopause, is that the one thing I've been really trying to work hard on is my memory and cognition, because I'm very aware of it. I'm very good friends with you, so I've learned a lot. And I think that it's super important that we understand what are some things that we can do to help keep our brain functioning properly. I know that you are the king when it comes to supplements and ingredients and understanding what works, what doesn't, what's the science behind certain ones that actually do play a big role. So I'd love you to provide some tips on some of the things that we can do, practical solutions that we can be doing right now for those of us that are in perimenopause and in menopause.
So I think I'd begin by saying any and everything you can do to balance hormones in the periphery will also support the brain. We can talk about those ranging from bioidentical hormone replacement therapy all the way through to some botanicals, herbs, and nutraceutics, which are vitamin minerals that can support this whole symptom. Bear in mind, not everyone's going to have symptoms. So much of this has to do with genetics. Love to come back to that very, very briefly so that we can help people understand there's a strong degree of personalization that goes along with what do we do, because there is no one size fits all. As it pertains to general brain health, and again, adopting this concept, this novel idea of brain spanning. What does that mean? Again, it's not just living longer and well, lifespan or health span. This is the idea of maintaining full and optimal cognitive faculty all the way through to the end of life. And if you're female, part of that means balancing estrogen better. Okay, so how do we personalize folks? Well, first we have to understand, again, this is information we can gather through their DNA, simple spit test. And in my clinical practice, I send this off to McGill University, and we wash through these very informing genetics. So basic, I'm going to boil it down to 3 classes of females as it pertains to what do we do or should we do, and then we can generalize. There's the female who has an optimal estrogen, testosterone balanced system. That is one that produces, there's 3 steps, essentially, how you produce estrogen, how you then metabolize that estrogen, and then how you get rid or flush that estrogen out. All of those 3 steps happen in every female. To what degree or the speed at which they happen is entirely relevant to the personalization routine. So you can be a high generator of estrogen, but not so good at metabolizing it and not so good at throwing it out. Or you can produce estrogen at a decent clip. You can also metabolize it well, but then again, not throw it out efficiently. Or you can produce it in a huge abundant amount, not metabolize it, and not manage by detoxifying it or throwing it out very well. That latter person is going to have a horrible time with menopause, because ultimately they're used to producing a lot and ultimately not knowing what to do with the end result of metabolism. So as soon as their ovaries start shutting down, their system goes entirely out of whack. The unfortunate reality about that latter case individual is they are also not a good candidate for hormone replacement therapy, because if we were to give them hormones, once again, their body doesn't do a good job genetically for detoxifying. So let's just assume the worst. That's how I like to generalize. Let's assume everyone out there would not do well from bioidentical hormone therapy. If you want to get screened, and you should, because frankly, back to the brain, to know that you process hormones, including, of course, estrogen well, and to know that you metabolize them and detoxify them well, you are possibly a very good candidate for hormone replacement therapy. Thereby, taking bioidentical hormones might actually help and manage your brain and nervous system much better through these perimenopause and menopausal times. So get that looked at. I mean, that's the best case scenario. But let's assume everyone's a poor detoxifier of estrogen. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, let's also consider for those ingredients which boost brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Another big term, let's use the acronym BDNF. BDNF is all about increasing the neurogenesis, or the ability of the brain to create new nerve cell connections, and neuroplasticity, right? The disconnecting and reconnecting. And so much of this is crossover. So again, how do we support hormones, and how do we support a brain to thrive throughout perimenopause and menopause? And so that leads me to a whole whack of ingredients to discuss. So SERMS, I think we've even had off camera, we've had discussions around SERMS, selective estrogen receptor modulators. Again, I know I keep throwing out these big terms, but they're important to learn. SERMS are a class of herbs, in this case, that can dock. Remember, I talked to you a bit about that receptor. So estrogen's receptors on cells are intended to engage with all sorts of things, but if estrogen engages, basically tells the cell to divide and to do stuff, right? You can have selective estrogen regulating modulator, these SERMs, that only dock on estrogen receptors that will not predispose you to things like breast cancer, colon cancer, hormonally estrogen positive related hormones. I'll tell you a quick story. You know, this is a funny story. I was reminded by it by talking about symptoms. Dr. Patrovskaya was our pharmacology professor in postgrad. And she wanted us guys in particular to understand what it felt like to be in menopause. So without knowing, we trusted her, without knowing, just prior to going for lunch, midday one day in my postgrad program, she lined everyone at the door, and she gave us, I'll explain what it was in a minute, she gave us a capsule of an ingredient to take. And she said, just before having lunch, take this capsule. So we said, okay, fine. We put it in our pockets and off we went. I was riding a motorcycle at the time, and I met my friends up who took a couple of different cars. We got to our favorite local restaurant. We all popped this magic pill. We had no idea what the intention was yet. And after about a 20-30 minute lunch, I hopped back on my motorcycle. You know, it was only a 5-minute drive, but I'll tell you, halfway back, we're at the U of T, University of Toronto campus. Halfway back, I had to pull over, yank my helmet off, pull my leather jacket off, and just, I was so discombobulated. I had no idea what was happening. I looked in my rear view mirror, and I was red, just beet red, and I was sweating. And then finally it passed. and put my helmet back on, went to school, and I got to the parking lot and I saw everyone experiencing, well, most of them experiencing the same situation, just beet red, just doing one of these sort of fanning themselves. And so we got into class, she was laughing her head off. All the students were exchanging these stories. And she said, in particular to you guys, because we'll start clinic, obviously the women would start their clinical careers long before they would experience menopause. Yeah. Basically, the message was, that's what it feels like to have a hot flash. You better take it seriously. What it was B3, niacin, which often causes a B3. Yeah, so it was a high enough dose that it caused a niacin flush, but it was intense. So it always sticks in my head. So although, and this is where I will never fully understand what it feels like to be menopausal. There was that one day in my life that I had the most intense hot flash, and I can't imagine living with that on the women go through this for 7 to 11 years.
It's awful. When I turned 47, 2 months after my 47th birthday, I started experiencing hot flashes. And I was like, wait, is this perimenopause? I wasn't sure. And then it went away. And then it came back like 6 months later. And I was like, what is going on? And can I tell you, it got to a point where it was so bad, I literally would be in tears saying, I can't. It's very hard to want to live with that every 30 seconds, every minute, every couple, like it is so difficult. So I'm happy. I'm not happy, but I'm happy to hear that you understand, because being a woman, oftentimes, and this is what Morphus, one of the things we really want to focus on is including the men in what we're talking about, because men don't often understand what we're going through. And that's just, by the way, one of 72 signs and symptoms that we have literally seen by speaking to women and through our research. One of 72. So that hot flash you had, one of 72. How crazy is that?
Listen, I understand. Other than hormone or bioidentical hormone therapy and some other select, estrogen receptor modulators, in natural medicine, we ultimately end up managing symptoms, because once again, this is a rite of passage. It's not to change or alter the structure of hormones or how they're, not to, re-regulate them in any particular way. I'm concerned about certain, ingredients, natural or otherwise, out there for some women who otherwise don't get tested for what is personalized to them. But I'm very comfortable talking about certain things. For example, sage. It's an herb. Most people are familiar with by cooking with it. It's in your kitchen pantry most likely, but at high therapeutic concentrations, let's get to that for a second. You can't eat enough sage to have an antipyretic or anti-sweating effect, as you would find in an herb, over the counter in your health food store. So I would encourage women who are looking for a natural, hot flash, night sweat alternative is to try sage, but you're not going to sprinkle enough in your pasta in order to see the difference. So I love that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, so much starts in the head, and serotonin gets dysregulated or imbalanced. Highly encourage folks to try Griffonia seed extract or 5-hydroxytryptophan, along with a little bit of B6. Vitamin B6 helps to confer. So in the morning, you take this with breakfast, 50 to 100 milligrams of 5-hydroxytryptophan. It's the precursor to serotonin. So you take this in the day with breakfast, and it makes serotonin for you. Serotonin, as we mentioned earlier, is an antidepressant, feel-good hormone that gets thrown off, depleted when estrogen is depleted during peri and menopause, post-menopause. And then at night when you take it, it helps to upregulate melatonin. So I like the combination of those three things as a general blanket statement. If you haven't tried those, to try them. Also, full disclosure, I think you mentioned it at the top, I work for a company called Brain Armour. And as a medical advisor to that company, one of the things I'm working on are formulas, of course, that support the brain, but we are in severe deficit of nutrients, in particular, as you know, you talk a lot about omega-3s.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the omega-3s, because that is so important.
And even more so during menopause and menopause and post-menopause, so every cell, and again, the trillions of cells that you're made of, certainly those cells that account for neurotransmitters and things that encompass hormones, they have a membrane around them, and that membrane is so hugely essential fatty acid laden, let's call it. The DHA, I affectionately refer to as brain juice. It is so important for the brain. It's known to be an antidepressant. It's known to be something that contributes to better sleep. We see in studies those that are deficient in DHA have broken sleep. We know that it's an excellent remedy and also supplement for attention, for a focus, increased focus, alertness, concentration, and again, a generally overall better mood. So, I mean, this is something, you want to consider taking on the daily. Brain Armour. And there's something else that I like to talk about, because during perimenopause and menopause, we get noradrenaline and adrenaline, these hormones that are relevant to fight or flight. They're relevant to the axis. I'm going to mention this again. PNEI, psychoneuroendocrine immune. So the way the brain is talking to the endocrine system, including your adrenal glands, you're firing up a lot more adrenaline. That's that angst, the anxiety, brain fog. This is the symptoms of brain fog, but they're often remedied. I love this amino acid called theanine.
I love theanine. I take it every single day.
Yeah. So theanine is a naturally occurring amino acid in green tea, and it's manufactured by a fermentation process that's available in supplements. Sun-theanine's got the most relevant evidence behind it. But what this will do for you is it's alpha wave inducing. So what that means is it creates a sense of calm without sedation.
Yeah.
And a better focus, alertness, concentration, and by the way, better sleeps at night.
So, I take it right before bed. I take anywhere from, I guess, 150 to 200 milligrams right before bed, and it definitely helps to relax me. I don't lie awake thinking with my mind going in a million different, areas or million different ways. So it's good.
Yeah, mind racing is another symptom that a lot of women can experience during perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Again, when that estrogen is trying to find its happy spot and it's going from that, sort of where it's used to being, whatever your happy baseline is, and it's doing this jagged up, down, up, down, up, down, until eventually 7 to 11 years later, it's plateaued. It finds its happy spot. It's that up and down that causes symptoms. Again, vasodilation, hot sweats, night sweats. Dysregulation of neurotransmitters, anxiety, sleep imbalances, mood dysregulation. So all of these can be remedied. So there's a lot of things that women can do and take. There's also a frustration around metabolism. So, I mean, the quick conversation around metabolism, other than how it starts in the brain around insulin sensitivity, I also like to recommend cinnamon. A lot of people think cinnamon for menopause. How does that relate?
Blood sugar regulation.
Right. So taking a supplemental form and making sure you put as much of that into your diet as possible absolutely increases insulin sensitivity. The thing about estrogen is, again, once it starts to decline, your body desires it. And so other than your ovaries and your breast tissue, what else makes estrogen? Fat tissue. Mm-hmm. And so the natural course of, again, the metabolism starting in the brain and the insulin sensitivity going down, the natural recourse by the body is to store extra fat tissue so as to be able to make that little bit more estrogen your body is thriving. So you could be, wow, I'm doing everything I can do through exercise and better nutrition.
Gaining weight anyways.
Yeah. So the game starts with insulin regulation. That's why I love cinnamon.
I want to talk about, while we're on the topic of insulin, in menopause, a lot of women have a predisposition to insulin resistance, which is the step before type 2 diabetes. Let's talk about insulin resistance, the importance of balancing blood sugar, especially in perimenopause and menopause, and brain health, because I think it is such a huge topic, and I'd love you to kind of just give us the 101 on it, because I do want the women, our viewers, our listeners who are watching, to understand the importance of balancing our blood sugar, but also how to.
Yeah, sure. So look, first of all, insulin is manufactured by the islets of Langerhans cells in your pancreas. These are very specialized cells that promote essentially the production and manufacturing of a hormone known as insulin. It's the gatekeeper to allowing sugar into all the cells of your body, in particular your brain. Your brain doesn't work unless glucose is allowed into the brain, and of course then eventually into the neurons. These are the brain cell units. It also is so responsible for allowing, again, insulin into muscle tissue, to all the various organs of your body, your heart. These are the most bioactive, of course, the brain and the heart. So without insulin being regulated, sugar can't get into cells in a fashion that is balanced. We can measure this in a clinical sense. We look at things like insulin growth factor, or IGF-1, insulin levels. We look at something called glycosylated hemoglobin. These are all things you can ask your doctor to check besides simply random fasting glucose, which really doesn't give us much of an idea. So finger on the pulse, IGF-1, insulin itself, and hemoglobin A1C, HbA1c. Great ways to know where you're personally at in terms of insulin balance. Listen, to manage it best, and I mean, there's another thing about menopause I happen to know, once again, I'll never experience, but it is cravings. It's a vicious cycle. When serotonin is low due to a low estrogen, due to your body trying to find its happy medium, you're going to be a carb craver. Most of us understand that already. When you're a carb craver and you're eating refined, very, very high sugar, very quick time-released foods, these are the cakes, cookies, pastries, pastas of the world, breads. We know this is bad, but ultimately we sort of rely, or we fall back on that a lot because it boost serotonin temporarily. We might even find that we have a better sleep at night when we're in this dysregulation of hormones. What that does is ultimately also dysregulate or imbalance glucose or imbalance insulin. So we get insulin spikes and then we get crashes, and that creates a vicious cycle. We've all heard this all too often. So how do we, from a lifestyle and dietary perspective, rebalance that? We've seen a lot more evidence over the last perhaps 3 to 5 years around intermittent fasting. This is not for everybody, but to try at least at first, a fasting of about 12 to 14 hours sounds probably pretty doable. So nothing after 9 o'clock at night, so no snacking or any food into the system. And then you go all the way until about 11 the next morning. You can choose your window where you're comfortable with, but ultimately fasting for at least 14 hours. Along with making sure you're getting every single color of the rainbow for fruits and vegetables, servings wise, minimum of half a cup for each of those. This is easily accomplished, by the way. That's 6 whole cups at minimum. That's government recommendations. We should probably be achieving 10, but that's minimum. Once you do that, there's a lot of fiber there, which we're all lacking, by the way. We can get into brain, gut, and hormones, and there's so many things to discuss. But at the end of the day, if you're intermittent fasting, you're getting a lot of fruits and vegetables into your diet. That's going to satiate, a lot of healthy fiber, keep you regular, manage the gut brain, and then a lot of good, healthy, lean protein. These are all so that it starts there. We can say get a good sleep, but when hormones are dysregulated, that's often really hard to do. So the other thing to throw into the mix, because you can do it, is exercise, weight-bearing activity, at least 20 to 30 minutes every single day. Walking counts, obviously. So good intensive exercise is actually going to offset, studies show, night sweats, and that's going to lead to a better, deeper, more qualitative sleep. So if folks start to do things like experiment with the 5-HTP, like you said, add a little theanine onto that in the evening, a little bit of B6. Make sure they exercise, weight-bearing activity. We're meant to push, pull, jump, squat, lift. You do that. By the way, we should also maybe talk very briefly about managing stress, because you're going to feel anxious and stressed, especially during those moments when you have a hot flash that are sometimes uncontrollable. Best way out of that is that my mentor, Dr. Andrew Weil, who's spoken so much about the 5-7-8 methodology.
Are you going to say deep breathing? Is that where you're going to go with that? The best way out of it?
4-7-8 or 5-7-8 method. So that's 4, count of 4 through your nose. You hold for a count of 7, and then through pursed lips through a count of 8. And you repeat that at least 4 or 5 cycles. That balances your anxiety and that hot flash better than actually studies look at things like benzodiazepines, which are anti-anxiety drugs. So this works better than that. Those are top line tips.
The nice thing about deep breathing, it also helps with heart rate variability, which we know plays a huge role, which I think we should do a whole video on HRV actually, because it's up and coming, although it's been around for a long time. I think it's one of those new buzzwords that a lot of us are going to be hearing a lot. And I think it's something we should talk about. Yes, go ahead.
No, there's more connections that go from your heart to your brain than from your brain to your heart. This has been discovered. The work of Dr. Roland McCready, al, at the we'll get into it maybe in a future video. At the end of the day, you're absolutely right. When you do this rhythmic breathing, you are telling your heart everything is okay, because of being in this, sort of discombobulated hormonal state. That's often more necessary, because that noradrenaline, adrenaline we're talking about that fires off more often because estrogen's on the decline, puts you into this sort of a bit of a freak mode. Like, why is this happening? And it's a vicious cycle.
One of the questions I have before we end our interview is, well, many of us are talking about boosting immunity now. Is there research behind boosting immunity, brain health, and what does the science say if the research exists?
Right. Remember I mentioned PNEI, psychoneuroendocrine immune. So we talked a lot about psychoneuroendocrine with a heavy focus on the endocrine side. Immune, that's a whole tie-in. So this is the study of how the brain interacts with the nervous system, which interacts with the endocrine or hormonal system, which all gets tied back into the immune system. I mean, at the end of the day, although the brain is very separate in its own immune system from the body, and it filters a lot of what happens in the body by what's called the blood-brain barrier, a lot of the instructions that come from the brain to the body as to what to do or how to manage the environment, et cetera. Like a perfect example is stress. The more stressed out you are chronically, because not all stress is bad, just like not all inflammation is bad, but when you're stressed out chronically, we know now, I mean, irrefutably, that depresses the immune system, so putting us more vulnerable. So just managing stress better is ultimately going to make us a lot more resilient against infection. But what's really cool, and I'm going to publish an article soon about this, is there are certain ingredients that have excellent research behind them that actually do show that they have a brain boosting effect, particularly BDNF or brain-derived neurotrophic, again, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, we used to think that we couldn't grow new brain cells. It stopped as the age of 9, early school. But we now know every day of our lives, we can make more brain cells, particularly focused in the hippocampus, the memory center of the brain. So we always want to do things to increase BDNF. So certain ingredients that can do that and simultaneously enhance or improve our immune system. So one of my favorites, quercetin. Quercetin's a bioflavonoid, very, very high in onions, certain brightly colored orange and yellow fruits and vegetables. So bioflavonoids, a type of polyphenol antioxidant. And so the literature is pretty strong for quercetin to boost BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, as well as protect against viral adherence. That means when a virus enters our body, it wants to attach to certain receptors and then inject its RNA information viruses require our cells, they hijack our cells in order to replicate. If we can sort of prevent that initial entry, then they die. Bacteria are different. They kind of feed off of stuff that's around them. They don't have to get into our cells. So that's one. Another one is zinc. Zinc is so important for the brain in so many different ways. And literally you can get this from a handful of pumpkin seeds. By the way, eating that before bed, there's another way. Get your zinc and boost tryptophan simultaneously. So there's a little trick, pumpkin seeds, a whole handful. And zinc has been shown also to protect viral adherence, as well. It is so important for neural transmission between cell to cell, so that our cells are actually not quite connected in our brain. One nerve has to fire chemistry onto another nerve to relay the message, and zinc enhances that particular situation. And the list is long, but I can tell you that there are many, many different ingredients that just sort of simultaneously happen to be good for both the immune system as well as the brain.
How much quercetin should we be taking?
Yeah, so quercetin is one of those things that unfortunately you kind of have to megadose to see the response. You'll often find 500 to 600 milligrams per capsule in your typical over-the-counter health food store brand. I highly recommend looking at the literature for that elevated dose. There's no CRN or the Council for Responsible Nutrition upper limit for quercetin, but I like to recommend to my patients around this time for a healthier immune system, the thousands of milligrams. I find that it's very safe to be taking a few thousand a few times a day. I've been giving this very safely in my patient population to very severe allergy sufferers in the 6,000 to 8,000 milligram.
Wow.
I don't recommend that for the average person without screening them, but that's, it seems to be something that the body knows exactly what to do with once it's had any sort of excess.
What about vitamin C and vitamin D? Do either of those or both of those play a role in, we know immunity, but what about brain health as well?
Absolutely. So one thing we're learning more about in terms of the brain and its own ability to detoxify, something called lymphatics. So we have lymph, right? The lymphatic system detoxifies in part. One of its jobs is to move stuff, debris, the immune system. The brain doesn't have, it has glial cells.
Hold on, Bryce, you have to stop. What about vitamin C and vitamin D? We know that it helps support our immune system, but what about its relation to our brain health as well?
Absolutely. So two of my favorites, they're very well talked about and very well known and evidence-based and studied. But to be reminded of how they're important for our immune system, in particular immune system and our brain function, I think is a key topic of discussion. So here's the thing. We know that we have a lymphatic system. It's important for the detoxification of cellular debris and the peripheral immune system. But our brain doesn't have a lymphatics. It doesn't have a lymph system. It has what are called glial cells. Those sweep up the mess left behind from day-to-day metabolism in our brain, and even peripheral ethereal toxins that exist with it, around us. And it's called the glymphatic system. Turns out vitamin C and vitamin D are really important for glial cell production and action, function, their ability to detoxify remnants in the brain. So important. And by the way, if you don't sleep well, and don't practice good sleep hygiene, particularly a cold or cool room, 68 degrees or so, unless you do, your glymphatics don't like to work at optimum. So, safe and therapeutic levels of vitamin C. Research shows no more than 500 milligrams a few times a day is necessary. I like the buffered form, but that's not well supported by the literature. I find that might be easier on the digestive system. Esterified form versus ascorbic acid. When it comes to D3, cholecalciferol is cholecalciferol. So D3 is D3 is D3, but I recommend, and the CRN does have an upper limit for this, that the average person without testing themselves looks to take about 4,000 IU every single day with a fatty meal, because a fat-soluble vitamin.
What about liposomal vitamin C? Is there research on that?
Yeah, so there is some research. I mean, again, the research is not entirely favorable in that direction, but I mean, if you can, liposomal is, I believe, a little bit better. I mean, and if you can afford to and have the compliance around doing it, then absolutely. It's a lot more expensive, and we're not 100% sure, but if money is no option, sure.
All right, final thoughts. Is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you'd like to talk about when it comes to perimenopause, menopause, and brain health?
My clinical experiences led me to believe that everyone is going to have a much easier time through the hormonal transition if they were to be personalized. We all metabolize, we all detoxify hormones at different rates. Once you understand what that is, finding a naturopath, homeopath, functional medicine clinician that puts a lot of credence and a lot of reverence into personalized testing using both genetic as well as functional assessment, you're going to have a much, much easier time, not just for hormonal transition, for everything. But again, without that, I think just in quick summary, getting your diet right, we talked about that. So intermittent fasting, ultimately increasing fiber intake through all the colors of the rainbow for fruits and vegetables, everything, every single day. It's pretty easy to do through salads and soups, making sure you get that 20 minutes of weight bearing activity along with some cardio, like walking every single, that's going to help with better sleeps. And then giving a try a few supplements. We talked about theanine. Couple 100 milligrams of theanine every single day to help with noradrenergic adrenaline and focus attention, alertness, brain fog, better sleeps. 5-hydroxytryptophan, 50 milligrams up to maybe 100 twice a day. This can help boost serotonin, which a decline of estrogen pulls down, along with a little bit of B6 or a B complex. And don't forget, arm your brain. I mean, again, full disclosure, I work on the medical advisory board for this, but DHA EPA, this is Albal, by the way, fully sustainable vegan form of DHA. So many of us are deficient, and if you're not supplying your brain with DHA, it's relevant to brain function, hormone function, it's relevant to immune function, it's relevant to skin health, beauty, anti-aging, you name it. So that would be my final thought, arm your brain.
How much should we be taking of Brain Armour? Is it a teaspoon a day, a tablespoon a day?
Yeah, it comes in liquid form. They're a capsule form as well. I like taking the liquid, and I take 2 teaspoons twice a day. That is quite high, but I like to maintain an omega-3 index of at least 9 or 10% at any given time. 25,000 plus studies have been done on the ingredients found in Brain Armour and concluded that this benefits us, and most of us
are. And so easy to do too. So you're saying twice a day, 2 teaspoons. Now, should we be taking it with fatty food because it is a fat that you're eating? So
it's an essential fat. That's a great point. You don't make it yourself, and it's not high enough in the diet. We can't rely, unfortunately, on fish. I don't believe fish is sustainable. I'm not vegan, but this is paleo friendly. It's vegan friendly. It's very sustainable for the environment. But if you're having a fatty fish, typically those are larger, like salmon we're familiar with. They're often laden with dioxins and furans and PCB and heavy metals, and there's just no clean sort of water sources any longer, unfortunately. This is self-contained algae. It's kind of fermented in a similar process as beer or wine would be fermented. It's self-contained, fully controlled, totally, sustainable, safe, pure. That's what I love. I mean, it's the purity of the product. I feel very confident that no other contaminants, of course, are in there. So, in fact, pregnant women, nursing women are absolutely also the highest risk category, and their unborn children. But during menopause, premenopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, we get deficient for other reasons. And you can't get enough of it in your diet, so you have to supplement.
Yeah. So again, 2 teaspoons twice a day, even for women in perimenopause and menopause.
Even 1 teaspoon once a day has been shown to change the vector, the needle on that omega-3 index. And if the brain controls everything, including hormonal balance and immune balance, let's get back to the basics and supply it with those ingredients for which we will have better overall health.
Well said. And the fact that there's, over 10,000 studies on omega-3. There's a great website. It's omega-research.com, and it shows all the studies on omega-3s and on all the different parts, whether it's brain health, heart health, hair, nail, skin, etc. So very well said, Bryce. Thank you so much for being on our show today. And how can people find you? I'm going to put your URL, your name below. Yeah, so
wildeonhealth.com. Most of my social handles, Instagram, Wylde on Health. Facebook is /Bryce Wylde. I practice at Toronto P3 Health downtown, p3health.net. That's personalized, participatory. So it's a very important thing to mention. So personalized, we talked a lot about, and that's important because but participatory is one of our P's. We don't just sort of sign patients up and help them. If you're not willing to get involved in your care, there's just no point at all. So P3 Health is a place to check out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on our show today, Bryce.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.
If you got value out of today's show, please give us a big like and subscribe to our channel. Also, turn on the notification bell because you'll be notified every single time we launch a new video. And please share our video because the more you share, the more you care, and the more we can help educate people on how to live a healthier lifestyle. Thanks for watching and listening, everyone. We'll see you next time.